house. Should have been condemned years ago. It stood on Ferry Street, just a few blocks east of Woodward Avenue, half swallowed by vines and the slow, deliberate decay that had overtaken so much of Detroit's bones. A sagging roof, broken windows boarded up with rotting plywood, and a front porch that leaned like a drunk after last call. The people who still lived nearby few, as they were, did not speak of the house directly. They might joke about the rot house or the old casket, but no one said its address. Superstition clung harder than logic out here. Gregory Mallon didn't believe in curses. He believed in debts. And the house at 474 Ferry Street had belonged to his uncle, a stubborn drunk, who had paid property taxes since 1997. Now that the man was dead, the city had thrown the house at Greg, with all the grace of someone flinging a dead rat into a neighbor's yard. Clear it out. Sell it if you can. Walk away if you can't. That was the plan. One weekend. Maybe two. He'd bring a crowbar, a few garbage bags, and that stiff Detroit resilience that had gotten him through worse places than this. He didn't tell anyone he was going. Not because he was scared, because no one would have cared. The first thing he noticed when he stepped inside wasn't the smell, though it was bad mold. Cat urine, something sweet and sour beneath it. It was the silence. Troy was never silent. Even in the dead of night, there were sirens, engines, drunk voices arguing through cracked windows. But here nothing. Hell, it was as if the house had swallowed sound the way it had swallowed light. Cut. He pushed deeper inside, boots crunching broken glass. Wallpaper peeled like dead skin from the walls. Rusted nails stuck out like broken teeth. The floor sagged ominously beneath his weight. He set up a work light in the living room and took stock. There was an old upright piano against the far wall. Keys, yellowed with time. The lid closed but vibrating faintly in the stale air. Stained couch sat at an awkward angle, its cushions sunken and torn. And beyond that, the stairs, leading up into darkness. He wasn't worried. Yet, he spent the afternoon bagging up the trash. Whiskey bottles. Old newspapers, yellowing photographs of strangers with hollow eyes. At sunset, he heard the first sound. A low thud. From upstairs, he froze. Garbage bag dangling from his hand. Another thud. He told himself it was an animal. A raccoon, maybe. A cat. He told himself a lot of things. But when he crept to the base of the staircase and shined his flashlight up, the beam caught something that made his blood turn cold. Handprint. Smeared across the cracked banister. Fresh. Too fresh. Still wet. Gregory stood, frozen at the base of the stairs, the flashlight quivering slightly in his hand. The handprint was unmistakable. 5 long fingers dragged across the peeling wood, ending in a smear that looked almost deliberate. There were no footprints, no scurrying animal, no creak of movement from above, just that thick, pregnant silence. He swallowed hard and forced himself to laugh. Too sharp, too dry. It cracked the air instead of comforting it. "Old house," he muttered. "Old smells, old leaks, not ghosts." He didn't go upstairs that night. Instead, he dragged a tattered armchair into the living room, set the work light behind him, and settled in 2 dews, a crowbar resting across his lap like some medieval weapon. The house didn't move again, but he dreamed of footsteps on bare wood, of slow breathing against his ear, of something wet sliding down the walls. When he jerked awake, the work light had burned out, leaving only the thin silver smear of Predon leaking through the broken blinds. And the piano. It was open now, its lid raised. Singaki was pressed down, held there by nothing he could see. Gregory stood, heart hammering, crowbar clattering to the floor. He stepped carefully toward the piano, key lifted by itself, slow and reluctant, like a sigh. Key sank down. And another. It wasn't music. It was counting. 1, 2, 3, coom. He turned and fled from the house, into the cool pre-dawn gloom. The day passed in a kind of fog. He found himself at a diner near Jefferson Avenue, one of those stubborn old places with cracked leather booths and coffee that could peel paint. The waitress, a heavy-set woman with kind eyes and tattoos creeping up her neck, took one look at him and said, "Rough night." Gregory gave a tight smile. Sleeping rough. "You don't want to stay there long," she said, almost offhand. He looked up sharply. "Why, shoo." She shrugged, wiping her hands on her apron. "Places like that, they hold things, bad things. Ain't about believing in ghosts or none of that. Just ... places remember." He forced another smile, left a few crumpled bills on the table, and headed back, because he had no choice. Wanted the house cleared. The city didn't care what the house remembered. When he opened the front door again, the smell was worse, richer, fuller. Like something had been stewing in the walls while he was gone. The piano was closed again. The handprint was gone. But there were stains, now small, dark blooms appearing along the edges of the floorboards. He knelt to touch one. The stain was warm, pulsing, almost ... breathing. He jerked his hand back. Stain shuddered once, then lay still. By the 3rd day, Gregory stopped pretending he was cleaning. Coat. He told himself he was sorting through the debris, salvaging what little could be saved. But really, he was wandering, room to room, drawn by the house's slow, wheezing breath. There was a smell that grew stronger the farther he went back, toward the kitchen. It wasn't the rot of old food or mold or vermin. It was sweeter, coppery, almost human. The floor tiles were warped and cracked. The refrigerator leaned against the wall like a drunk too proud to fall. Door he hadn't noticed before stood in the far corner, half hidden behind a broken pantry shelf. Gregory approached it cautiously. It was small, narrow, not the kind of door made for regular use. He yanked it open. Stairwell gaped before him, plunging steeply downward into darkness. Basement. Of course, there was a basement. Key. In Detroit, basements were either tombs or graveyards for memories no one wanted, a place to bury, not just junk. Threshold. He hesitated at the threshold. Something about the opening unsettled him more than anything else in the house. It wasn't the dark. It was the air. The way it seemed to pour out, cold and slow, as if it had been waiting behind the door for years. For him, he backed away and shut the door. Pooh. But not before he saw something glint down there. Something metal. Something shaped like a latch. Or a handle. That night, he slept in the armchair again. If you could call it sleeping. The house breathed around him. Walls popping and shifting in the heat of the day, contracting in the chill of the night. 3:03 a.m. The piano sounded again. Not a note, a scrape, like a hand dragging across the keys. Gregory stayed frozen in the chair, sweat cold on his back. He didn't open his eyes, didn't want to see what might be standing by the piano, watching him, but done. He decided to leave. He'd bagged enough junk to justify it to the city. P could say he'd done his best, that the house was a lost cause. No one would blame him. No one would even check. He packed his bag, grabbed the crowbar, and stepped toward the door. And stopped. There were footprints on the floor, leading from the basement door, across the living room, right up to his chair. Small, bare, child-sized. The footprints were wrong. Too light to belong to a man, too perfect to be real. Gregory crouched, heart hammering. He touched one with the tip of his finger. The dust was disturbed, yes, but there was no depression. No weight, like the feet had skimmed the surface without pressing into it, or like the floor had wanted to remember them. He straightened up too fast, the room swimming briefly around him. He needed air. He needed. The basement door was open. He hadn't heard it, hadn't seen it swing wide. But there it was, gaping like a split wound at the far end of the kitchen. And something moved at the edge of the shadows. Just a flicker, a suggestion. The hair on his arms stood up stiff and trembling. For one desperate second, he thought about calling someone. The police, maybe. Friend from work. Anyone. But who would believe him? Who would even answer? He was alone. He had been alone since the first night. And somewhere, deep inside, he knew that was the point. He should have run. He could have left the house, driven to some motel, thrown his phone into the river, and never spoken of this place again. Instead, Gregory found himself walking toward the basement door. Slow, mechanical, as if something inside him had been wound too tightly, and now played out its motion without his consent. The staircase was narrower than it should have been. The steps sagged, the boards crying softly under his weight. The smell grew stronger the farther he descended. Not rot, not mold. Copper, metal, something sharp and bloody on the tongue of the air. At the bottom, the flashlight flickered. He accursed under his breath, tapped it against his palm. The beam steadied, cap, revealing. A cella half collapsed, under years of neglect, broken shelves, rusted cans, shattered jars, and in the center of the room, a door, regular door, low, narrow, set into the foundation itself, rimmed in old iron bolts. The latch was old, the handle slick with rust, but the door looked newer than anything else in the house, as if someone recently had replaced it or repaired it. He stepped closer. The door vibrated under his light touch, not with the trembling of old houses, but with something deeper. Pulse. A heartbeat. Slow. Steady. Waiting. Gregory's hand hovered over the latch. Somewhere far above him, the piano screamed a discordant, bone-jarring chord that rattled the very foundation. The flashlight died, and in the pitch black, he heard breathing. Not his own, not above him, not behind him. From the other side of the door, soft, wet, smiling, Gregory stumbled backward, hand jerking away from the door as if burned. In the darkness, the basement seemed to close around him. The air grew thick, the damp rising from the concrete like steam from a grave. He scrambled up the stairs, banging his shin hard against a loose board. His breath came in wet gasps as he threw himself into the kitchen, slamming the basement door shut with a hollow boom. He braced his body against it, heart pounding, waiting for anything to hit it from the other side. But nothing came, only silence, only the slick, heavy silence that had lived here long before he arrived. After a long minute, he staggered back into the living room. The work light still lay on its side, flickering in and out like a dying star. The air smelled worse now. More copper, more wet earth. It was as if the very walls were bleeding. He packed that night, tossed everything into the back seat of his car without care. He left the garbage bags, the crowbar, the gloves. He didn't want anything that touched this house. He slammed the trunk shut and got behind the wheel. The engine groaned, then caught. The headlights flared on, illuminating something standing at the second-story window. Shapy, small. Head tilted just enough to be wrong. Watching. Gregory's hands shook as he threw the car into reverse. Tires screaming against the cracked asphalt. He peeled away from the house, not daring to look in the mirror until he hit the main road. Even then, when he glanced up, he saw nothing but empty black behind him. And still he didn't feel alone. He booked a cheap motel on Gratiot Avenue, the kind with stained carpets and buzzing fluorescent lights that never quite shut off. But it was clean, safe, unhaunted, At least, that's what he told himself. The first night, he slept 12 hours straight. The second night, the dreams returned. He dreamed of the house, of standing once more in the basement, facing the door, hearing the latch click open slowly, painfully, and something crawling out, smiling, whispering his name. On the third day, he woke to find dirt under his fingernails, deep under, packed into the cuticles, like he had been clawing through something in his sleep, Karn. And when he sat up, heart hammering, he found his boots by the door, caked in mud, wet, as if he had been walking through the field behind the house, as if he had gone back, and brought something with him. Gregory checked out of the motel before noon. The clerk barely looked up when he turned in the key. Just nodded, mumbled something like, "Good luck," without meaning it. Outside, the sky hung low and heavy. Gray clouds pressed down on the city like a hand squeezing the last breath from it. He drove aimlessly at first, cutting through the crumbling neighborhoods east of downtown, past gutted factories and churches missing their spires. He thought if he just kept moving, just didn't stop, he could outrun it. Outrun what? He didn't know. Maybe he didn't want to know. But by early evening, the car was almost out of gas, and the familiar, grim shapes of Ferry Street rose ahead of him like black teeth. He hadn't meant to return. He hadn't. But there he was. The house sat quiet and still, its windows blind, the porch slumped like an old man too tired to stand. It was waiting. Gregory parked 3 blocks away. He sat there for a long time, engine ticking as it cooled, hands clenched on the steering wheel. Finally, he got out. Car. He walked the distance with the slow, grim inevitability of a man walking toward his own grave. The streets were empty, not abandoned, empty, like the world itself had peeled away, leaving only this stretch of broken concrete and sagging wood to mark the memory of the city. At the foot of the porch steps, he stopped. Sound drifted from inside the house. Not the piano, not footsteps, laughter, soft, high, like a child's, but wrong, as if it had forgotten how to sound human. The front door swung inward without a touch. The living room was exactly as he had left it. And yet ... not. The stains on the floor were larger now, pulsing faintly in the half-light. The air smelled heavier, wetter, like fresh dug graves. At the center of the room stood a figure, small, still, facing the staircase. It didn't move when he entered. It didn't speak. It only waited. Gregory's throat closed. Hisk. His legs moved without permission. He stepped inside, and the door slammed shut behind him. The figure turned its head slowly. Gregory flinched. Not because of the face, but because it wore his own, paler, thinner, hollowed out, like something carved from rotten wood. It smiled at him. And the house sighed, a deep, contented sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. From the walls, from the floor, from inside him. Gregory tried to speak, tried to say anything, to ask, to beg, to deny. But the words dried up on his tongue, as if the house itself had reached inside him and stolen them. The thing in front of him, his own face, blinked. Slowly, a wrong blink. Out of time, out of rhythm. It raised one hand in a languid, broken wave, then pointed toward the basement door. Gregory shook his head, a tiny motion, a child's denial. The thing smiled wider, cunt, and pointed again, more insistent this time. The basement door stood open now. Of course it did. It had always been open, just waiting for him to realize it. He took a step forward, and then another. The room seemed to shift around him with every movement. Angles that shouldn't exist warped slightly, stretched like wax under a flame. The walls seemed closer, the ceiling lower, the air thicker. Breathing became work. He reached the top of the basement stairs. The darkness yawned beneath him, thick and velvety, full of soft whispers that slipped through his ears and planted themselves deep in his mind. Come back. You left us behind. You are the missing piece. He placed one foot on the top step. The wood creaked, almost lovingly. Behind him, the figure waited, not pushing, not rushing, just watching, like it knew there was no need to hurry. The descent was inevitable. He made it halfway down before he heard the piano again. Soft this time. Almost tender, a lullaby made of broken chords, of cracked ivory and forgotten hands. Each note a nail. Burial. The air grew colder. The smell of the earth rose up, rich and suffocating. He reached the bottom step and saw the door. The iron-banded, bone-white door. Wide open now, waiting. Inside, only blackness. But not empty blackness. Blackness that watched. Blackness that breathed. Blackness that remembered. Gregory stepped forward, one hand outstretched, as if to shake hands with a long-lost friend, or to pull himself into a grave he had dug without knowing. The darkness folded around him, welcoming him home. At first, there was nothing, just cold, heavy and still, kind of cold that lives in stone coffins, the kind that presses into the bones and lingers after breath is gone. Gregory floated there, weightless, nameless. Memory dripped away from him, slow and syrupy. Who he was, where he had come from. Even the idea of leaving ... began to rot. King came. The whispers, soft, gentle, persuasive. They stitched themselves into his mind like black thread through wet cloth. You are ours now. You came home. You chose Carly's ease. Whisper buried itself a little deeper. Eat. Word hollowed out a little more of him. until only the shell remained. Come, and the memory of a name. He opened his eyes. He was standing back in the living room. Morning light thin and gray leaked through the cracks in the boards. The stains on the floor had grown. They pulsed faintly under his feet. How had settled, satisfied, content. The front door stood wide open, swinging slightly in the wind. Kun and Gregory ... Or what? Gregory's shape stepped out into the light. The street was empty. Not dead. Just ... waiting. Houses leaned against each other, hollow-eyed and broken. Cars sat abandoned. Rust, bleeding into the concrete. Not a soul in sight. But the world watched. City breathed crumb. And somewhere, deep beneath the crumbling skin of Detroit, something smiled. At the corner of Ferry and John R., a woman pushing a cart full of cans paused. She saw him. Saw the way his shadow bent wrong. Saw the thin, not quite right smile that cracked his face. She crossed herself without thinking, muttered a prayer in Spanish, Tao, and hurried away. She would forget soon. They all would. Pridden, forgetting was safer. Gregory turned up his collar against the chill and walked. Not hurried. Not lost. Home, where the house would find another and another until there was nothing left to resist, only empty streets and hollow shells, too, and memories that had never really been human at all. The house on Ferry Street still stands. People drive past it without looking. Kids dare each other to touch the porch railing and sprint away, laughing too loudly, voices trembling beneath the bravado. But no one enters. Not really. See, they feel it, even if they don't understand it. The way the air thickens near the steps. The way the windows seem to blink if you catch them out of the corner of your eye. The way the front door sometimes opens just a crack when no one is watching, as if breathing, as if calling. Some say it's just a house, rotting wood, sagging beams, a relic of a city that forgot itself, Krita. But some those who remember in dreams, those who feel the thin places late at night know better. They know the house isn't empty. It never was. Simply waits. Patient. Hungry. Listening for footsteps on the porch. Listening for hands brushing the dust from forgotten door handles. Listening for hearts still foolish enough to believe they can leave, because once you step inside, once you listen long enough, you don't leave. Not really. But you simply ... change. Gray heart of Detroit, on a forgotten street, under a bleeding sky. A door creaks open just a little wider. Waiting. Still waiting. Always waiting.